Well, I just introduce myself first of all. So my name's Andrew. I'm a neuropsychologist. I work for Case Management Services. We are a private company based in Edinburgh. We provide case management and we provide medical legal services. We also have a new sister company, Neurotherapy Services. And both stands are out in the foyer. The cakes are gone, as you can see. Well, I personally, first of all, I have to say, hats off to Gemma for the previous talk. Such a powerful, thought-provoking, inspiring presentation. So I will try to follow that as best I can. But hats off to her for that. That was incredible. I'm very pleased to be here. Pleased that there's such a good turnout and such a good support for the event. I was looking back in my notes and things, and I could see the last time I did a presentation at a Head Injury Information Day was in 2018, which feels like several lifetimes ago. So it's great to be back. I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact of change and transition on mental health. Particularly timely, as it happens, because this week is Mental Health Awareness Week. You may be aware of that. Hopefully, if it's doing its job, then you will be. And the focus for this year's Mental Health Awareness Week is loneliness and the impact of loneliness on mental health, which is also particularly pertinent given the situation that we've all been through over the last year or two, which I'll be returning to in the context of this talk. So, here we go. So, it's maybe generalizing a little bit, but I think most of us would probably describe ourselves as creatures of habit. By nature, tend to prefer things to be stable, things to be routine, things to have structure. Most of us tend to struggle to some extent with change, especially when it's imposed on us and it's out of our control. And this is dealing with change and dealing with things that don't quite go to plan is something that many of the head injury survivors that I work with describe as being particularly difficult. We tend to go for the same mug for a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. We go for the same routes to places. We tend to go for the same food choices when we go shopping. You know, things tend to follow a similar and perhaps quite predictable path. Most of us struggle when things become unpredictable and when things become uncertain. So uncertainty and change can challenge our sense of stability, our sense of normality. Uncertainty and change can challenge our perception of personal control and our ability to determine the course of our lives and what's going to happen next, which can lead us to feel anxious, stressed, worried, and wondering what's going to come next and what we can do about it. However, periods of uncertainty and change can also represent opportunities for us for personal growth and personal development. And the aim really is to try to get us develop a mindset which is positive, which is proactive, which is resilient, and which is solution focused, so that we can see challenges that lie ahead and uncertainty as being hurdles that we need to overcome or we need to navigate, rather than just being barriers that will block our progress. We don't need any reminding that we've been through and we're currently facing and we continue to face unprecedented times of change and uncertainty. I've just done a small list here. This could go on much longer. Environmental change, climate change, cost of living, Ukraine situation, Brexit, Scottish independence, and of course looming over everything, the COVID-19 pandemic, all of which are happening at a national and international level, of course, but affecting us individually, alongside and weaved in with all our own challenges that we have, that we deal with on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. So we've all been challenged emotionally, psychologically, physically, financially, socially, all kind of ways in this last period. And I think it's no exaggeration to say that the COVID-19 pandemic has affected has changed all our lives, really. I mean, everything will never quite be the same again, will it, that we've been through this. And we tend to refer to life before and life after. You know, life was so different then, and we had such a different outlook. Things were seemed very, very different than they do now. And the mental health impact of this has been underlined by a number of published studies, but I think this United Nations report really underlined the extent of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. They report a global increase of around 25% in terms of anxiety and depression rates globally, which also coincided with severe disruption to mental health services. And their findings were that mental health services, neurological and substance misuse services, were the most disruptive of all, rather. So really there's a kind of perfect storm of hugely increased demand in terms of mental health provision, at the same time that services were overstretched and were very disrupted. And this comes off the back of already stretched resources globally as well, and severe inequality in terms of service provision. And again, this report here that was published in October 2021 illustrates the situation. This was up until 2020, the data used in this survey. From around the world, just over 2% of healthcare budgets were set aside for mental health services on average. The report, again, perhaps not surprisingly, found significant inequalities, both between countries, that might be expected to some degree, but also across regions within countries. Funding for community-based mental health services were found to lag behind hospital-based services, and all the 2020 targets, I think apart from suicide, one of the targets for suicide prevention, were missed. So the situation pre-pandemic was already very stretched, and there was already significant problems in terms of service and resource access. Then COVID-19 struck. And leading to this comment from one of the World Health Organization directors, while the pandemic has generated interest in and concern for mental health, it's also revealed historical underinvestment in mental health services, and countries must act urgently to ensure that mental health support is available to all. So it lays it all out pretty clear. So what about the key factors that have impacted on mental health during the COVID-19 pandemic? Well, a lot of these will be very familiar to many, if not all of us, of course. We had very limited opportunities to both give and receive support from family and friends. We had very limited access to healthcare through GP or through domiciliary services, therapy, rehab, etc. Limited access to the kinds of activities that we enjoy in the community. Significant impact on travel, ability to get away and have a break, and also on work, on education and training opportunities. And I think when you look at the studies which have looked in a bit more detail about the impact of the pandemic on mental health, it's really highlighted that social withdrawal and isolation has been a key factor in terms of determining mental health, which again fits in very much with the Mental Health Awareness Week message about trying to redress that, to enhance mental health. So common fears and anxieties during the pandemic, again, these will be very familiar to most, if not all of us. Obviously, primarily catching COVID itself, but particularly, I think, in the context of head injury, that a number of people have described concerns about catching COVID and the potential additional effects that can have on top of existing head injury symptoms, particularly the reports of symptoms like fatigue and cognitive changes that have been reported in samples of COVID survivors, especially people who've had really quite severe COVID, such as brain fog and word-finding problems. And all the other concerns: becoming ill, requiring hospitalization, symptoms persisting in terms of long COVID, the impact on friends and family and their health and well-being, getting access to healthcare, and the longer-term impact. But also the bigger question, the bigger impact, looking at this: when will it all end? When will things get back to normal? And what does that normal what does that mean anymore? And then the rise of the description of the new normal as part of our language. So that was during the pandemic, so things should be getting a bit better now that we're coming out, but it's kind of mixed feelings. I don't know, certainly is for me, I don't know if it's the same for everybody else, but I think there's a general feeling of, well, cautiously optimistic. You know, we've been through that, we can kind of get through that, we can get through anything. We're out of the worst of it, but we're not maybe quite out of the woods yet. Mixed in with a sense of cautious optimism, feeling of relief, that maybe things now finally can improve. But there's a lot of questions, aren't there? The rolling back of restrictions. Is it too fast? Is it too slow? Continued risk of catching COVID, it's not disappeared, it's still there. Will there be further variants? What will that mean? Will we need to go back into some kind of lockdown in the future? Removing masks and social distancing and those sorts of changes, which can take some getting used to. Returning to workplaces, educational settings, face-to-face, social, leisure, recreational activities and so on. But also that sense of just trying to re-establish, just trying to get back to some kind of life. And if that's how it was, or if it's not going to be very different. And I think one thing that a lot of people describe, again, who've head injury survivors, is really the loss of a lot of resources. So a lot of groups and activities in the community have gone down because of lack of funding, or there have been problems in getting that re-established, or staff have moved on. So the situation's it's not as straightforward as just resuming activities and just getting back to how things were. Things may never quite be the same again. So managing change and transition, I don't know if you can see this very well, but obviously we're currently in this phase of transition, phase of change, with these very mixed emotions. We know when we face change and transition that it's something that we have to negotiate, it's something that we need to do, but it's not always that straightforward. I don't know if you can see this slide, but it's like, who wants change? A lot of hands going up. Who wants to change? Not so many hands up. So there's a difference between knowing what to do, isn't there, and knowing this is something needs to happen, and then actually putting that into practice. Not always so straightforward. So how do we manage change and transition? Well, it's a difficult subject because everybody manages it differently, of course. Everyone has their own strategies, everyone has their own approaches. But the first thing to say, just in terms of the impact of the pandemic, is that there's been, when studies have looked at the data with regards to the rise in mental health during particularly during the early stages of the pandemic, it's found that it peaked earlier and then improved over time. It's not back to pre-pandemic levels, but it certainly improved over time, which suggests that there was a significant impact initially, but then does attest to the resilience and the adaptation and recovery for a lot of people who had initial problems. But as I say, many people continue to feel apprehensive, very mixed emotions, myself included. It's important to acknowledge these fears and these anxieties, but also to normalize these. Anxiety in the context of change and transition is a normal and understandable reaction. And it's important to allow ourselves and those around us plenty of time to readjust and get used to what this new landscape looks like. So, how do we manage it? Well, as I say, everyone manages it differently, so I'm not here to give a recipe as to how everyone's going to get better and navigate their way through this transition. But from in my experience, I think it's very important to view change and transition as a process and as a journey. This is something that's going to take some time, and we need to give ourselves that time to make this transition. We need to take small, practical, manageable steps and at a pace that feels comfortable. We need to set realistic goals and targets for us to try and achieve as we come out of this period. We need to introduce changes gradually, and we need to try to assimilate our old and our new routines. Not necessarily everything that had to change in the pandemic needs to change back again. There may be new things that we've done, new activities that we've become involved in, new ways of thinking, new ways of doing things which don't necessarily need to be jettisoned. So what can we keep? What's changed? What's positive for us? And what can resume? We also need to take steps to manage our mental and physical health. And there's many, many ways that we can do that. We've heard about some of these approaches already in the talks this morning. So this could be a combination of different things. It may involve complementary or alternative medicine. It could involve yoga. We heard about this morning the benefits of yoga. It could involve homeopathy or Reiki or acupuncture or use of herbs and all kinds of things like that, which may have varying evidence bases but work for many, many people. It may also involve changes of lifestyle, managing our lifestyle to enhance our mental and physical health. Physical exercise, again we've heard about earlier on, diet, sleep hygiene, which we heard about earlier, use of relaxation, controlled breathing, mindfulness, meditation, all kinds of strategies depending on what works for us. There's also been, because of the demands and the stretch on mental health resources, a huge increase in terms of using self-help techniques as well. And again, if any of you that have explored this will know that it's a bit of a minefield. There's a lot of good information, there's a lot of not so good information out there and good resources. So there are books, there are audio books, there is internet resources, websites, apps, podcasts, all the different formats. I've pulled together, in preparation for today, a list of resources under all these different headings, which I've not listed today for the purposes of this talk. But if anybody would find it helpful to have access to any of these resources, then do email my emails at the end. So do email me if it would be useful. I can send you a copy of that. On the last slide, I'll give you a couple of pointers to some things which I think I've, in my experience, have been quite helpful. But yeah, so do get in touch if that would be useful. But of course, it's also there's a certain amount that we can do. We can take steps, positive steps, proactive steps to manage our health and well-being. But it's also important that we need to monitor our mental health very closely. These symptoms of anxiety may pass. They may peak and go through peaks and troughs, but they may persist or they may worsen. And it's very important that we manage that. And if we feel that these are significantly interfering with our day-to-day life, then we may need to seek some professional input, most likely through the GP or through local mental health services. That may involve accessing some psychological therapy, some counselling, or maybe consideration of some medication or a combination. So, on the one hand, it's about managing this transition. It's about using the strategies that are available to us to get through this and to enhance our health and well-being. It's also about trying to see these periods of change and transition as being an opportunity for growth and for development. So, again, personal experience, family, friends, as well as professionally, there's this sense of a sort of reset. There's been a period of being detached, being separated from our usual our routines and activities, of being separate from the people that we get support from and that we offer support to, being away from our usual activities, the things that we enjoy that are important to our identity and make us feel good. So there's now a sense of, right, okay, well, we can reset. Things can go back to how they were, and things can also change. It's an opportunity to make positive lifestyle changes and to make adaptations. Re-engage with previous activities, but also explore new interests and activities as far as they're accessible and they're possible. But also an opportunity to refocus. Again, there's been a lot of stargazing and navel-gazing and consideration of the bigger picture, I think, for a lot of people during the pandemic, myself included, about getting back to the fundamentals of what's important, about having that opportunity to reset, take a step back and just look at the bigger picture again. But most importantly, the opportunities we come out of the pandemic, learning to spend time in the company of others again, which can be a mixed bag. It can take a bit of getting used to. I don't know how everybody felt today, but sometimes you see a sea of faces and a big group of people again, and it can take a little bit of getting used to and readjusting. And hugging, physical contact, handshakes. It's that sort of, is it okay? We can't we? That's okay. Which is, and that how that feels. It's such a natural human expression to just, for your loved ones or those around you, to just, and then suddenly it's this new thing. So many of these little transitions and these little hurdles to get used to. And hopefully, maybe some of the distance that we've had from families has made the heart grow fonder. And we're not all the cracks and all the family dramas when we get back together again, hopefully have all been solved and everyone's happy. But it is a mixed bag, joking aside, isn't it, to spend time again with nearest and dearest. But it's something fundamental has changed. When we've missed something, something's been taken away from us and is now, we now have the opportunity again. We have a real opportunity to look forward and grab the opportunities where they come along. So, just some concluding comments. So we've been through an unprecedented and continue to go through an unprecedented period of change and uncertainty. Everyone in the room has been affected by COVID-19, as well as a number of the other national and international issues that we're all been grappling with. We continue to face significant challenges at a personal and global level, despite whatever our background is and whatever our circumstances are. But I think what the data shows, but what we, I think, know, and hopefully we can see this when we talk to friends, we talk to family, is that we've shown a significant capacity for resilience, change and recovery at a local and at a national level. And that we have to take considerable, I mean, how many times have heard that we got through this, we get through anything expression, I think is extremely apt. Everybody at some point in time will feel anxiety, will feel feelings of fear and apprehension, and that's entirely normal. We need to be to acknowledge that, and we need to normalise that. We need to take the opportunity to take stock and to make positive changes where possible in our lives, take on new challenges, start new activities, follow new pursuits, new hobbies, new interests where we can. But it's also important that we need to take our time. We need to give ourselves and everyone around us time to adapt and to change. This is not something that happens overnight. It's going to take some getting used to. We need to take these practical steps to manage our mental and physical health and well-being, using a combination of approaches: lifestyle, self-help, complementary alternative medicine, if those are our interests. But also we need to monitor our mental health and be very clear that if things don't improve or things do deteriorate and anxieties and other mental health problems really start to take over and affect our lives and our well-being, then we do need to seek professional help. Okay, so thank you very much. What I was going to say, just to go back to the previous point, is that I didn't list all the resources that I've pulled together to manage anxiety and manage mental health and stress for the purposes of this talk, but do email me. Email address is there. If it would be useful, then I'm more than happy to forward that on. But just to say, there's just a couple of websites that I think are quite helpful. One is actually nhs.uk. They have a series of mental well-being audio guides. I don't know if anybody's accessed those. They're quite short and they're quite accessible, quite user-friendly, and they're, I think, quite useful. There's a good website called getselfhelp.co.uk, and that's got a lot of information and resources for managing mental health, anxiety and stress. Obviously there's Gemma's book. I'll give it another plug. But in terms of books, there's a book called Overcoming Anxiety by Helen Kennedy. That was in 2014, which you'll be able to get on Amazon. That's very helpful. And just in terms of podcast, for people who access podcasts, I've listened to a few episodes of this. It's called The Anxiety Guy. I don't know if anybody's seen that podcast. It's by it's an ex-professional sportsman. I think he was a tennis player, and he suffered very disabling, very crippling anxiety problems, and he has now started a podcast talking about his experiences and talking about strategies and approaches to manage these difficulties. And it's that's a good listen. So, but as I say, do get in touch if you'd like a list of all these other resources which might be useful for you, whatever works for everybody. Okay, that's me. Thank you very much.